Welcome to the ROPESCAST, the independent voice of the Middle East. I am your host, Ksenia Svetlova. ROPE stands for the Regional Organization for Peace, Economics and Security. We are a young organization dedicated to laying the groundwork for a post-conflict Middle East. We do this by connecting forward-thinking Israeli and Palestinian emerging leaders with like-minded peers all across the Middle East. At ROPES, we share a holistic vision for our region, where every individual has far more to gain from regional integration and conflict resolution than they have to lose. For more information on our work, please visit our website at ropes.org. And joining us today is a towering figure in American foreign policy and diplomacy, Elliott Abrams. With a career spanning 4 decades at the highest levels of the US government, Elliott's influence on Middle Eastern policy is profound. His key milestones include Deputy National Security Advisor under President George W. Bush, where he oversaw US policy in the Middle East and North Africa. Special Representative for Iran and Venezuela, serving as a lead architect of US strategy during critical geopolitical shifts. Assistant Secretary of State for both International Organization Affairs and Inter-American Affairs under the Reagan administration. And currently, a Senior Fellow for Middle Eastern Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations and the leading voice on democracy. Elliott, it's a pleasure to have you with us on the ROPESCAST. Thank you so much for agreeing to speak to us.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for the invitation.
Fantastic. So, the first question that I want to ask you, of course, deals, with the war in Iran. And while I think that the US administration entered this conflict with a clear directive, no ground intervention, it seemed this attitude toward that shifted during the last few weeks, but we are here again today. No ground intervention, no ground invasion. While this avoided a long-term quagmire, it seems to have left the Iranian regime core power structures intact. Looking back, was a limited war ever going to achieve the ultimate goal of regime change many in Washington and here in Israel also hoped for? Or did it essentially leave us with perhaps the worst of both worlds?
Well, I don't think it's the worst of both worlds. First of all, we have to make this judgment today. I mean, you're asking the question, it's perfectly fair. I'll try to answer, but whatever our answers are, what if we sit here, 2 years from today and the regime is falling? Then we will look back and say, well, surely the war in April 2026 played a role. So that's one thing I would urge people to remember. We're looking at a small slice of time. I agree with those who say that an air war, which is what we did, is very unlikely to overthrow a regime that's been in place for so many decades and is very well organized and very brutal. I mean, we saw that in January, willing to kill, who knows, 10, 20, 30, 35,000 unarmed civilians. But the real goal of it, I mean, if you look back at what President Trump's been saying for decades, was to destroy their nuclear program. That was the main thing. And the missile program, I would argue, grew up as a means of protecting the nuclear program. I'd say the same thing about Hezbollah. Why did they give Hezbollah all those rockets and missiles? Under the theory that Israel would be deterred from striking the nuclear program because it feared a Hezbollah missile attack. And that proved obviously wrong. Both Israel and the United States have attacked the nuclear program, and it's in pretty bad shape now. I mean, there may or may not be a deal about the nuclear program. As you and I are speaking, it looks as if the Iranians are saying, we won't negotiate that. Even if they don't negotiate it, it's off for quite a number of years now, I'd say for 2 reasons. One, it has largely been destroyed, all parts of it. And 2, now the taboo against bombing it has also been broken. And so it's reasonable to think that if they, let's say a year or 2 from now, start to try to rebuild, either the Americans or Israelis or both will strike that program again. So I don't think it's the worst of all possible worlds. And as to whether it is, now we have a particularly brutal hardline government in place in Tehran. Wait a minute. The government in place in Tehran in January murdered tens of thousands of unarmed civilians who were protesting against the regime. These guys are not worse than that. That is the nature of the regime. It was before the war, it is now. It will be until the day the regime falls.
Well, I share the vision that it's absolutely true that, the current leaders of Iran are just as brutal and just as savage as their predecessors. But it's President Trump that actually speaks about the new leadership, we changed the regime. What do you think? What does it all mean? I mean, we know very well that it's the same regime, it's the same people, maybe more influence for IRGC now, but, nevertheless, it's the same people.
Yeah. He says that about Venezuela, too, that it's a new regime. It's not. One person was removed, Maduro, it's the same regime. And the same thing is true in Iran. I would agree with you that the influence of the IRGC has grown in comparison to the influence of the supreme leader and the clerics. That was always going to happen, I think, when Ali Khamenei, the late supreme leader, died. There was no one who was going to have his power to really give orders to the IRGC and have them immediately followed. If he had died a natural death, it would have been the same. He was 87. So this would have happened in a few years anyway. We do see now that though the regime is an IRGC regime, nobody else seems to have any real power, and the supreme leader, his son, is invisible, maybe in very bad shape physically, is not giving orders as near as we can make out.
In any case, he was close to IRGC also when he was intact.
Yes, it's true. And we do seem to see, however, divisions within the regime that we didn't see before. The first round of talks in Islamabad, I remember the foreign minister said one thing, and then the IRGC basically said, shut up. And there seemed to be divisions among people like Galibaf, the Speaker of the National Assembly, and Vahidi, the head of the IRGC. So it's a divided regime.
We will definitely going back to discuss the nuclear program. I have a few more questions on that, obviously, but I wanted to first tackle the issue of the preparation to the war. Okay, so we discussed the ground of, offensive that was not part of the deal, and perhaps emboldened Iranians because they knew that, well, if there is no ground invasion, so we can afford certain things, certain losses, but in any case, we will not be targeted like Saddam Hussein was in 2003. But at the same time, I'm comparing the current war with the war in Iraq in 2003, which I had an opportunity to cover as a reporter on board of USS Tarawa and on Courage. I was in both in 2003. I remember, that not all of European countries joined at the time, but still it was quite a wide coalition. George Bush, President George Bush Jr., he definitely, invested a lot of effort in, having this coalition with Great Britain, with other European countries, Denmark, and so on. And if we go back to the 1991, then it was even wider coalition with Arab countries and so on. This time, President Trump decided that it's enough for just Israel and the US to act. Why is that, to your opinion? Was it not worthy to think maybe before the war of, an attempt to build this coalition wide or, less wide than it used to be 30 years ago, but still?
I think it would have been much harder now. Israel is much more unpopular in Europe than it was, decades ago. really since the Gaza war, 2003 to 2023 to 25. And the president may have decided that's just not going to work. It's not going to happen.
Also, I think US is less popular in Europe right now.
Yes,
All the Greenland talk and so on.
Yeah, and in the first Gulf War, that was a response to the invasion of Kuwait, the seizure of Kuwait by Saddam Hussein. So European countries could say, well, this is an obvious case of aggression, clear, pure case of aggression. The Iranian case was different. It was a preemptive strike by the US, and you had others like the British saying, we won't help that. But then when the Iranians got in and started attacking all the Arabs, the British were willing to come in.
Do you think that indeed the Iranians, they plan to attack the US? Because there is no doubt about, violence and aggression towards Israel. But I mean, US targets were last hit by the Iranians long time ago in the 80s.
Yeah, they have different ways of doing it. They did kill Americans during this war. What they did not do, at least as far as I know, is commit acts of terrorism like trying to attack the US mainland or US embassy. But they certainly did continue trying to kill Americans, which they have been doing for decades. I think many Europeans don't know this or don't remember it. From the Marine barracks in Beirut, Khobar Towers in Saudi Arabia, according to the Pentagon, hundreds, maybe 600-700 of Americans killed during the Iraq War, and thousands more wounded, disabled. So this is a long time coming between the US and Iran. The Europeans should be aware of it, though, because many European countries have uncovered and fortunately stopped Iranian terrorist efforts in Europe.
Well, I don't know what they knew, but it seems that the difficult climate, otherwise not related to Iran, but to other international affairs, about NATO and possible withdrawal from the US and all the words about Greenland and plans and so on. I think that all of that didn't contribute either.
No, it certainly relations and the president's insults of NATO and his musing about maybe the US should pull out of NATO. I mean, all of this, this was a really bad moment for trying to build that kind of cooperation.
But, what about the Arab countries? I mean, the Arab countries and Donald Trump actually launched his presidency with the Gulf tour. He didn't reach other Arab countries, just the Gulf countries. And it seemed that they have it under control and that the relations are just great. But then all of these countries try to persuade him to, not to launch this war. Maybe they were unsure of the results and fearful of the Iranian retaliation. And indeed, they were hit very, very hard. So what about that?
Yeah, I think what they were afraid of was exactly what happened. And apparently, Arabchi, the foreign minister, made a little tour of the Gulf, saying to people, stay out of it, or you will be hit. Of course, he was lying because they did stay out of it, but they were hit anyway. So their fears were justified. To me, the interesting question is, now what? That is, logic would suggest that the relations between the Gulf Arabs and Iran have been poisoned, including with Qatar and Oman, which were really quite friendly to Iran. Remains to be seen. I mean, the war is not over yet. There's a ceasefire, but that has to be seen over the coming months and years.
Elliot, do you think, by the way, we're talking about the ceasefire, and here in Israel, at least, we are really unsure about, the continuation of this war. And I can tell you that, frankly, people are afraid to book flight tickets because you don't know when the war will resume. Do you think that this ceasefire will hold? Is there an appetite right now in Washington for renewal of hostilities?
Yes, I think a lot of people are afraid also to travel to Israel because they won't be able to get out if the war starts instantly or restarts instantly. Um, uh, I don't think there's a desire on the president's part or on the part of the Iranians to restart the fighting. But we have unresolved questions, mostly the Strait of Hormuz. It does seem to me possible that people just walk away. What I mean is, I don't think we're going to negotiate a 50-page peace treaty. But what if the Iranians say, we're going to open the Strait of Hormuz, and the Americans say, okay, and we'll allow Iranian ships. And then the president says, with respect to the nuclear program, it's been obliterated. They may try to rebuild. And if they try to rebuild, I tell you now, I am going to bomb them again. So their nuclear program will, when I leave office in 3 years, it will be in ruins. That seems to me a possible outcome here, in which both sides acknowledge there's nothing to negotiate.
Well, it seems, quite a logical outcome, of that. You need to somehow de-escalate and the international trade and American economy, it needs to recover from all of that. But, again, I'm asking from the point of view of the Middle Easterners, Israelis, but also Arabs, who say, well, so you say that if they will return to and they will try to recover, the nuclear abilities, capabilities, then America will strike again. But what if they will just, present to the world the nuclear bomb, just like North Korea did? And I think the American administration is still traumatized by that, by North Korea just suddenly breaking through to the bomb. Is it something that might happen also in this case? And where we will be?
It's interesting that you say that, because I think actually the best short argument for the war, best explanation for the war is we cannot afford another North Korea. And Iran would like to be North Korea, would like to say, well, we're developing peaceful uses of nuclear energy. We're not, there's a fatwa, we don't want a bomb. And then one day, boom, they announce the bomb. I do not think that will happen now. Whether or not they agree on IAEA inspections. We know that Israel knows a great deal about what's going on in Iran. We know that its intelligence service has really permeated the Iranian nuclear program and the Iranian government. We know that both Israel and the US are ready, willing, and able to bomb the nuclear facilities, which did not happen in North Korea. So I think that will not happen. I also think that we're now aware of the danger of the missile program in a way that, I mean, everyone is aware of it now, not
And
just.
drone threat.
Yes, yes. Drones are harder to stop because, you can build them in a basement. But on the missiles, I think if they start rebuilding in a significant way their missile program, they'll get hit again. On drones, I think that's a question of defense. And I think the history of warfare is, in a certain sense, the invention of a new weapon, and then a year or 10 years later, defenses. It happened with tanks. It happened with airplanes.
Mm-hmm.
And in Ukraine, it's happening with drones. And the Gulf Arabs and the US, I'd say, were behind because we didn't really understand it and realize that we would get hit by it now. But the Ukrainians have developed some drone fighting drones. The Israelis are developing laser weapons. So we are behind. In 5 or 10 years, we will not be behind on, I think, on defenses against drones. Drones can use AI, but defenses can also do so. So I think it's logical to believe that Iran will try to rebuild these programs, but they should now know they will be prevented.
Absolutely. Going back to Israel and American-Israeli partnership in this war, we see that there is this growing sentiment among Arab capitals and also in some circles in Washington, definitely in Europe, that Israel nudged the US into this war that is perceived as, unsuccessful war by many. Was it really Israel that, and I did see, of course, the report of the New York Times and so on. Was it really Israel? Was America unwilling to go to this war, and then suddenly Netanyahu came and he was the only one who convinced that it was easy and let's go and do it. And there is like 100% success. What do you think really happened in this situation, Room?
Critics of President Trump have been saying throughout his first term and now, he takes no advice. He listens to no one. And now they're saying, no, but he was completely turned by Netanyahu. He's been talking about Iran for 20 years, literally 20 years. You can go back not only when he ran for president 10 years ago, but a decade before that, talking about Iran, even going back to the hostage crisis. To me, it's just ridiculous that people argue, he didn't plan to do anything about Iran, and then he was convinced by Netanyahu. I would say he was convinced in the case of Midnight Hammer by the Israeli performance. That is, once they showed we can do this, and they eliminated most of the air defenses, he jumped in. So the convincing was not anything that Netanyahu said, it was what Israel did in June 2025. This time, I think, there was good evidence that Iran was continuing to build its nuclear weapons program. He has said over and over again, he was never going to let that happen. I think it is now 5 presidents have said that. Though Trump was the only one who actually acted on it. But of course, Iran was getting closer and closer to a nuclear weapon.
But wait a second, Elliott. I just want to remind everyone that it was President Trump that said after the Midnight Hammer that Iranian nuclear capabilities were obliterated, and it was final, and it was also said by Prime Minister Netanyahu. And what happened? I mean, in 8 months, you cannot recover your nuclear program that was completely obliterated. So what happened?
What happened was they were overstating what had been achieved, whether knowingly or unknowingly. I mean, but even at the time, people said obliterated is wrong. Damaged, maybe very badly damaged. But I think we know from this board that that was a very considerable overstatement by both of them. Much more damage has been done now. Still, not everything has been destroyed. We think of the highly enriched uranium, of which they have, we believe, 440 kilos, maybe buried, maybe unreachable, maybe not. But that is the main piece of the program left.
Are you not bothered that, the goals of this war, they kept changing, since the beginning of the war, because we followed here very closely. I did, and wanted to really understand, so what is it that do we want to try to achieve? And, there are no fans of Iranian regime, as you can understand here in Israel. But there was this growing concern that if there is unclarity in regards to the goals of the separation. So maybe you cannot achieve if you don't specifically, put this goal. And, we heard also in different times that the goal was to get out this enriched uranium. And now it seems that it may be impossible to get it out because it's too deep. It's in the, enemy territory, and it's very risky. So do you still consider it a success? And, I'm asking as somebody who lives here. I will be affected if eventually they will get the bomb.
I do consider it a success because an enormous amount of damage was done to both the missile program and the nuclear program. Now, I think the main criticism, or a main criticism that can be made of President Trump, was the terrible messaging, by which I mean no explanation to the American people at the beginning of the war first, which should have happened on the first day. Then a couple of Truth Social postings. That's no way to communicate on such a serious matter to the American people. Then almost daily discussions with the press where he makes one remark or another, which are sometimes contradictory from one day to another. So I think if you follow, as you do, follow his statements very, very closely, you don't get a clear message. To me, the clearest thing to say is Israel and the United States decided it was too dangerous to let the Iranians continue to grow their nuclear weapons program, to move closer to being able to build a nuclear weapon and a delivery system, and to protect those activities with a huge number, thousands of ballistic missiles, so that someday it would be too dangerous to attack the nuclear program. All the rest, I think, is marginal.
Well, Ehud Barak thought that in 2011, and there were different ideas about that
Right.
in Israel at the time. The decision was eventually not to strike, which might be a mistake,
It may well have been a mistake. Historians can debate that. I thought it was pretty likely in 2011 or 2012, and it might have been the right thing to do back then, yes.
Well, so we cannot, undo what was not done. Well, so it is what it is. I want to ask you another question about Israel, because, we see in the polls that this war in Iran is very unpopular in the US. And it's not only among the Democrats, but also among, the supporters of President Trump and the Republican camp. And we see that there is a lot of backlash against Israel by personalities like Tucker Carlson and his lookalikes, but also from the left side. And we see that in the polls, the attitude towards Israel, I think it's the lowest ever since the beginning of the relationship between the two countries. What can be done to improve it? What can be done here in the Middle East, perhaps, to change it? What are your thoughts about that?
Well, there's a bunch of things there. First, I think one thing you said is not accurate, and that is polls have shown that Republican voters, Trump voters, MAGA voters do support the war. In the polls I've seen, 85% support the war, which is incredibly high. So that's
among MAGA.
Among Republicans and among Trump
I
voters.
saw 42%, but
it is lower among younger Republicans than older Republicans, but Republicans and Trump voters overall, really quite strong support for the war. Now, that said, it is also true, as you were saying, that overall support for Israel is down. It's particularly down by age in both parties. That is, 70-year-olds are more supportive of Israel than 50-year-olds, than 30-year-olds. And it falls for whatever reason. It may be a lack of familiarity with the history of Israel. It may be what younger people have been taught and are being taught in universities. I think that's a huge problem. And that is related to, but not exactly the same as, the anti-Semitism issue. Um, if you look at people like Tucker Carlson, whom you mentioned, I don't think they're fundamentally anti-Israel. I think they're fundamentally anti-Semitic, and that leads them to be anti-Israel. It is a manifestation of anti-Semitism rather than vice versa. It wasn't criticism of Israel that led them to be anti-Semites. Um, I think we see a growth of anti-Semitism in, let's say, the West now, in Canada, in just about all of Western Europe, in Australia, and in the United States. That's dangerous and troubling. Again, more among younger people, and of course on the both extremes, left and right. I'm going to make a partisan remark, and so I'm a Republican, so take this with a grain of salt. But
We know that.
um, you do not see this growth of anti-Israel and anti-Semitic activity among in the center of the Republican Party. When you look at, there are 53 Republican senators, one or two are critical of Israel, quite critical, but most of them, 50 of them, are strong supporters of Israel. What is striking to me and very unfortunate now is that more and more people in the center of the Democratic Party, people, for example, who might run for president, people who are running for governor or senator, are becoming extremely critical of Israel. Or to put it a different way, if you want to run for office in the Democratic Party now, you need to raise the level of your criticism of Israel quite a bit. I'll give you two examples. Two high-ranking officials from recent Democratic administrations, Jake Sullivan, who was National Security Advisor for Biden, Wendy Sherman, who was Deputy Secretary of State, have recently been extremely critical of Israel, have talked about, in Sullivan's case, cutting off some arms to Israel. In Wendy Sherman's case, use the word genocide. Why are they doing that? I think, frankly, that's the way you have to talk in the Democratic Party today if you want a future. And they're not running for office, but certainly they're not running for elective office, but certainly they are thinking about their own future in the party in elective office. Jake Sullivan is a potential Secretary of State, for example, for any Democratic president. And it's striking to me, Rahm Emanuel, who may run for president. This is something Democrats seem to need to say if they want to have a future in the party. That's not true yet, thank God, in the Republican Party, that you've got to turn hostile on Israel. So I think the Democratic Party is, in that sense, well, it has a greater problem, I think, in that sense. But this phenomenon of greater anti-Semitism is very broad, very worrying. I never thought I would see, to take an example, Canada having anti-Semitic demonstrations at, for example, at Jewish schools. If you want to protest against Israel's foreign policy, you demonstrate at the Israeli embassy. If you're shooting at a synagogue or a Jewish school, that's anti-Semitism. That has nothing to do with opposing Israel's policy. And we're seeing that. And we see it in Australia. We see it in the United States too. So this is a new, well, anti-Semitism is a very old phenomenon, but the manifestations of it we're seeing now are new. If you had asked me 10 years ago or 5 years ago whether we would see this, I would have said no.
Well, I remember as a former member of Knesset, and I visited the US, I think, in the capacity of the MK for the first time in 2015. We met by then a lot of members of the Jewish community who told us about the rising trends of anti-Semitism and expressions of hatred, specifically towards the members of the Jewish communities. Blaming them for what Israel is doing or not doing. So this is something that is like a spiral that is, of course, it's faster developing after 10/7, but yeah, but the roots were there. I just have to mention that, we grew up, here in Israel that, first of all, with the notion that the bilateral support, bipartisan support in the US is vital for our survival. But then something happened because, our prime minister decided to basically bet on one party, the Republican Party. Frankly, many of us think that it was a mistake because, in case of the United States, you always change each other. Republicans and Democrats, it's going and come back. On this regard, do you see the bilateral support, bipartisan support for Israel, going back to what it was, not today, but in some years, and what to happen for that to take place?
I think it'll be a long time before it gets back to the levels that it was at. I agree with you that Netanyahu and Trump are part of this, and their relationship is part of this. And I mean, one should not criticize them for having a close relationship, but I think there is this wide impression, certainly among Democrats, that Israel has become more of a right-wing or Republican cause. Now, Netanyahu may be out of office soon. You have an election this year. Trump, we know, will be out of office now under 3 years. And maybe the situation changes then. If you have a prime minister, to take the ones in the running now, Bennett with a foreign minister, Lapid, and you have a new US president, does it change the situation? Yes. How much? I think that is a very good question. Yeah. And when you're looking at the extremes, left and right, they use Netanyahu and Trump, but that's not, the real issue for them. If you look at the things that look at Pedro Sanchez, for example, in Spain. Yes, he attacks Netanyahu, but his fundamental attack is against Israel. If you look in the US at Tucker Carlson, sure, he attacks Netanyahu, but he's not going to become pro-Israel if Bennett becomes the prime minister. So I think rebuilding the bipartisan support, it has taken a long time to get to where we are. It will take a long time to get back. It will not happen overnight. It will not happen if you change prime ministers and we change presidents. It will take years to build it back. I do think it's worth saying a small piece of this is the question of aid to Israel. And I think tactically, it would probably help if the United States were not giving aid to Israel, but were a partner the way we are.
Which is something that Trump administration discusses today openly.
Yes, and Netanyahu has discussed it, and be a partner in the way that Australia or the United Kingdom or I don't know, Canada are partners, and they purchase American arms. The timing is a question, with Israel spending so much right now on on Iran and Lebanon and Gaza. But I think it was wise. This is back when Netanyahu was, I guess, finance minister, 96, I think, to eliminate the economic aid. And I think it is probably wise now to phase out the military aid. And in some focus groups I've seen, it does seem to matter to a lot of Americans. I'm struck by the fact that, not all of this is fully appreciated, even by President Trump. I mean, it's striking that he keeps talking about Israel as such a great partner that fights. He doesn't talk that way about Ukraine, which is our other great partner that fights, where people are patriots and willing to die for their country. So I think it would probably be better politically for Israel if it could wean itself off the US aid and became a military partner, which it certainly is, and purchaser of those arms it needs, for example, the F-35 and other jets.
That's very, very interesting what you're saying, Elliot. And I just want like to add that, yes, many of us hope that there will be a change in Israel after elections this year. And certainly, not only Prime Minister will change, the policies might change significantly. And here in Israel, there is a lot of criticism towards the current policies that are detrimental to our foreign relations in Europe, in the Arab world, and in the United States.
Yeah, I mean, to me, one of those things is the what is called here settler violence in the West Bank. And people say, well, there are hundreds of thousands of settlers, and the criminals are just maybe 100, 200, 300, to which my response is, fine, arrest them. I think it does an enormous amount of harm to Israel that that these what seem here to be criminal violence, acts of criminal violence against Palestinians in the West Bank are not punished. And I attribute this to the nature of the current governing coalition, to the presence of people like Ben-Gvir and Smotrich. It would help Israel a lot, I think, if, well, this government or another government really clamped down visibly on those acts in the West Bank.
That's definitely what we hope that what will happen, again, with the establishment of the new coalition and new government. We are almost running out of time, but I still have two questions to ask you. The first one is about Qatar. It has very close relations to the United States, special relations indeed. But we also know and we follow, the infiltration of Qatar to academic institutions, NGOs, think tanks, and so on, all across, not only US, but also Europe. What is your take on, where the relations are going between US and Qatar?
Well, they've been enormously clever in the way they've done this. That is, you could spend the kind of money that they've spent without getting much result. But yeah, they've bought influence, in my view, in think tanks, in universities, in law firms, in lobbying firms, just all over, while they are pursuing a policy of, in my opinion, supporting the Muslim Brotherhood, supporting Hamas. I don't expect that to change in the short run unless they change. That is, they were the country most damaged by Iran. The country that was hit by the most rockets, missiles, drones was the Emirates, but not much damage was done. In Qatar, they damaged Ras Laffan, a liquid natural gas plant, badly. And it looks, from what I've read, as if its production will be reduced by 20%. This is billions of dollars a year for several years until it can be fixed. So are they rethinking their relationship with Iran? I would like to see, for example, a law in the US that any money from any foreign source, China, Qatar, to a university or a think tank, any kind of charitable organization, nonprofit, has to be reported immediately. We don't really know the full extent of the Qatari spending, and we should. I would like to know more about these universities that have campuses in Qatar. Now, some have closed them, but the problem is that they're not free. that they're not academic institutions allowed to pursue truth. For example, they're not allowed to criticize the government of Qatar. And if those are the
To
rules,
explore its ties with the Muslim Brotherhood and other terrorist organizations.
yeah, they shouldn't be there if they have to be under such rules. This administration, the Trump administration, has been quite close to Qatar, and maybe won't change its view, but maybe in the next administration will have a different assessment of all this.
Yeah. And the last question, but nevertheless important one, it's about the future of the Abraham Accords. We see that the relations between Israel and the UAE is actually growing, and it's a very solid bond. But it seems that Saudi Arabia, well, I was sure that there will not be a normalization with the Saudis without any kind of progress on the Palestinian track. But now it seems that we are just growing further apart all the time. What do you think, what will happen next there?
Well, first, the Abraham Accords have held solidly through the Gaza war and this war. Morocco, Bahrain, Emirates have not changed their relationship with Israel. I agree with you that the Saudis will not join in. They're quite different from the Emirates in that they have a huge population. There are more than 30 million Saudis, whereas in the Emirates, most people living there are expatriates who do not have any political rights. And I think, particularly after the Gaza war, MBS is thinking about public opinion. And I think that, in a way, the cooperation that was possible through CENTCOM during this Iran war makes it less likely that he will normalize with Israel, because we've seen that this kind of military and intelligence cooperation via CENTCOM was possible even without his changing with respect to Israel. I think you could see some steps over the next few years, more Israeli business people allowed to go to Saudi Arabia, maybe even someday a trade office, which is the way things often begin. But normalization, in the sense we have seen it with the Emirates, I think now is quite distant. I doubt that, distant meaning, are we going to see it in the next 5 years? I don't think so. But I do think the Abraham Accords will hold. And I think this other integrating factor in the region has proved to be CENTCOM, and it's proved to be critically important.
Yeah, well, in ROPES, our vision is that, we have to invest our efforts in both tracks simultaneously, the solution for the Israeli-Palestinian track, and at the same time work on regional integration and cooperation, with nations of this region, because that will also allow us to make some progress on the Israeli-Palestinian track, because otherwise it will be impossible to do something about it.
Someday when I don't have this cough, we'll come back and talk about the Palestinian track.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Elliott, for joining us today and for sharing your invaluable insights into these complex strategic shifts. It has been a truly illuminating conversation. Thank you so much, and we would love to host you again.
Thank you, Ksenia. It's been my pleasure.
You've been listening to ROPESCAST, the independent voice of the Middle East. I'm your host, Ksenia Svetlova. To learn more about our work at ROPES, to support our mission of building regional integration, and to listen to more episodes, please visit our website at ropes.org. You can also follow us on social media to stay updated on our latest initiatives and solidarity visits across the region. Thank you for tuning in, and we look forward to having you with us for our next episode. Shalom and salam.